How to edit photos in Lightroom 2024 tutorial. In this video, we're going to be discussing on Lightroom and how you're going to edit your photos in Lightroom in the easiest, most simplest, and seamless way. So to start things off, what we are going to be doing is we're going to be coming over to our Adobe Lightroom like this. Now, to start things off, how are you going to import your photos? So we're going to be coming over to the library section, and over here, what you're going to do is you're going to click on import. Now, once you click on import, you are going to choose the files you want to move the pictures from. So let's say I'm going to go to the administrator section, then I'm going to go to the downloads. Let's say there's where my files are, and you can choose the folder where you actually have the file. So as you can see, I have a lot of images over here that I can import. So what you're going to do is you're going to choose the images you want to import. Okay. And once, let's say I'm going to deselect all of these and I'm going to select only a few. So let's say I'm going to select these three. And then once you're done with those, you're going to click on import. And once you click on import, you're going to click on done. And all those imported photos are going to show here in your library. So let's say I have this photo over here. I want to go ahead and edit it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on it, and then I'm going to move over to develop. Now, once we do this, as you can see, this is a blank photo. Okay. Nothing going on in it. Okay. Now, what you're going to want to do is you're going to add some color into it because that's the whole point of Lightroom. So to start adding your color, first of all, what you're going to do is you're going to set the hue. Okay, you're going to set the temperature. Do you want it to be warm? Do you want it to be cold? That's the most important part. So I want my picture to be a bit warmer because as you can see, if I make it a bit colder, the sky, it just gets overburdened with the blue. So I'm going to make it a bit warmer and match it with the cornfields out there. So once we've made it a bit warmer, I'm going to make it slightly greener to give it, a little grunge look. Now, once that is done, you're going to mess around with the lighting. The lighting is basically your exposure and whatnot. So to mess with that, we're going to go ahead and slightly increase or decrease the exposure. Now, as we can see, the more I increase it, the more the photo just gets overexposed. So it's already quite exposed, so I'm not going to increase it. I'm going to decrease it. So once we've decreased the exposure, as you can see, it's much more, stagnant now. Then we're going to move on to contrast. Now, what contrast does is it takes the colors and it either makes them bolder if you increase it. So as you can see, the colors are darker and much bolder now. Or if you decrease it, the colors just become dry. So I'm going to go ahead and increase it slightly. There we go. Now, once we do that, my personal preference is that keeping your highlights fully low, or maybe, at -75. Because highlights are something that ruins your photos. It ruins the detail. So as you can see, if I increase it, the details in the sky and the trees is not there. But when I decrease it, you can see, although it has become quite darker, but the details are now showing. So to make it not darker and still show the details, you can increase the shadows and look at that. So always keep the highlights low and the shadows high because that just helps you with showing more detailed and structure to your pictures. Then you have the whites. Now, the whites is something I wouldn't mess around with because if you go lower, it doesn't make a lot of difference. But if you go higher, it's just going to make your photo a lot more shinier. So it's basically an exposure on steroids. Okay, so I'm going to, keep it a little high, not too high. Then you have blacks. Now, blacks, again, takes the darker areas of your photos. If you increase it, it's obviously going to expose them. If you decrease it, it's going to darken them. So look at this. Now, I changed the whites, and it makes it look much more better. Then we have texture. Texture is something that just sharpens your photos, which I wouldn't mess around with. It's a very useless feature, in my opinion. So I wouldn't mess around with the texture prompt. Then we have clarity. Clarity, again, something I wouldn't mess around with. It just makes your photo look unrealistic, and that is not something that I'd like. Then we have dehaze. Now, dehaze is something that might work in some instances, okay? It might work in some different, type of weather audiences. Like if you slightly increase it, as you can see, the sky looks much more better, but now we just look extremely unrealistic, so I'm going to keep it on 0. Then you have vibrance. Now, vibrance and saturation is something that messes around with your color tones. It makes your color tones very, you could say, flavorful. Okay, it adds a lot of spice to your color tones. So what I do usually is I tend to slightly increase these to give my image a little flair to it. So now, as you can see, the warm color has a very nice finishing over it. Now, moving on, once we're done with that, we're going to come over to the curves. Now, Curves are extremely underrated because not a lot of people mess around with the curves, but curves help you a lot. So the white curves that we have mainly mess around with our brightness, okay? So once we have this over here, as you can see, if I increase or decrease it, it's going to mess around with the brightness and everything. So what I usually tend to do is I make sure to create 3 plot points. And now I'm going to work around with these plot points. So as we can see, if I go higher, it's going to increase the exposure. If I go lower, it's going to decrease the exposure. If I go forward, it's going to dehaze the color. If I go backward, it's going to, just sharpen the hell out of it. So we don't want that. So I'm going to keep it somewhere in the middle point like that. Then we're going to mess with the mids. The mids, in my opinion, are fine like this. And then we have the highs. Now the high tones is something I usually like to keep high because it gives the photo a more realistic look. Now, then there's the RGB tones as well. You can mess with these, but I wouldn't especially recommend them. Okay, and once you're done with all of these, obviously work around with the exposure as well. As you can see, the image looks much more, post-worthy now, and it looks pretty cool. It looks pretty touched and toned. Then we have hue, saturation, and luminance, which is the HSL colors. So you can control the different color tones. So as you can see, if I decrease the red tone, it's going to make me more red. Then you have the orange tones and all. Now for a picture like mine, which is already filled with a lot of colors, I wouldn't mess around with the HSL unless you want to decrease some colors. Like let's say I want to decrease the yellow a bit. So I can do this and look at that. It makes it a little more orange, or if you could increase it, it makes it a bit more green. But yeah, that's what mainly HSL is for. Then we have midtones, shadows, and highlight color gradings. So as you can see, the midtones, I would personally keep them a little over here. There we go. And you can increase the intensity as well, just like this. So I'm going to keep the intensity somewhere over here. Then we have all of the shadows and highlights. Again, this is not something that I would mess around with too much because it's just something that totally overexposes your color grading. Now moving on, you have sharpening. Again, sharpening, something I would not like to mess around with. Luminance, again, something I would not mess around with. Obviously, if you have a lot of noise and grain in your picture, you could use luminance, which will reduce your noise a lot. But obviously my image, as you can see, does not have too much noise in it. Then we have the transformation techniques in which you can actually transform your photos look. But again, we don't really need to mess around with this. Then we come down to post-crop vignetting. Now this is basically adding vignette to your photos, which is basically a black border like this. You can make yourself the center of attention by adding vignette. Then we have grain to give noise to your photo, which gives it a pretty classical look. So that's pretty good as well. And then you have tints. Now tints are pretty decent as well because this is like the final calibration of your color grading. So you can just mess around with these, choose the correct tones for yourself. So in my opinion, I'm simply going to keep it over here, and I think these look good. Now, one more thing I forgot to mention while editing is that you can actually compare your edited photo with the original photo at the same time. So if you click on this YY button over here, look at that. So this is the difference between our images, okay? And you can also half slit it and up and down it. So pretty incredible, right? So we can see that we made the photo from this to this. That's absolutely incredible. And then we're just going to go to the standard view. Once we're done with all of this, we're going to click on File. We're going to click on Export. And then we're going to export our file into our computer. And that is how we're going to edit photos in Lightroom. So if you enjoyed this video, please do make sure to drop down a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, let me know down in the comments below and I'll be making more for you. Till then, that is all from me, and I'll see all of you next time. Goodbye.